Good evening, everyone. Can I welcome you to the first meeting of the new Planning Policy and Local Plan Advisory Group. And welcome, everyone, and hope that we are going to have some good discussions over quite a long period of time over a local plan review, but also on other important issues around planning. So I have received no apologies for absence tonight. We're all here, which is great to see. So apologies.
I'm a slimmed down version.
You have. Sorry. Oh, Councillor Stewart's missing off the list completely. I checked all that was on the list. That would explain something, Mike. I do apologise. Right, okay.
He's on the top.
Yes. Oh, good start. Right, declarations of interest. Has anyone got any interests pertinent to tonight's discussions to declare? No? Public? Sorry.
I don't have a conflict, do I, as the exec member for the local plan, because we have a tradition that the exec member does sit on this committee.
Yes.
I thought better flag up.
It's going to be very useful to have you here as well. Thank you. Right. Okay, I will note that. And then public participation. We have received one written submission, which has been circulated. And I think members have actually also received something to themselves from a second participant. Sorry, non-participant, should I say. Right, item, obviously that representation will be taken into account when we reach the relevant item on the agenda, 6. Item 4, we have the minutes of the last meeting of the previous local plan working group held on the 15th of April 2025, which have been brought here for us to sign off. Is everyone happy that they are a correct record for those of us who were on it? Yes, lost in the mists of time. Right. Okay, we will accept them as a correct record and I'll sign them off after the meeting. So item 5, the terms of reference. So we have a proposed terms of reference document. And I think Alison, as the co-author, is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. So the terms of reference set out for the group are amended to reflect the changing nature of the group from last time we met. It's obviously a cross-party advisory group, and we want to be clear on the advisory nature of the group. So that's tried to be captured in the terms of reference. And we're hoping that the group will participate in helping us progress different aspects of the local plan, so considering evidence base and policy preparation as we move through the process. There are the advisory nature of the group. Just to clarify, there is a part where it's in the terms of reference where any where issues are escalated to as an advisory committee to the executive. Issues will be presented to both the executive member for housing, planning and safe communities, as well as the director for city development, who has delegated authority to progress sign off of different aspects of the plan, such as the evidence base and consultation strategies, etc. So there's one amendment to be considered as part of that process.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, the item is open for debate. Does Councillor Crawshaw?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's just a couple of bits that I wanted to just raise, and perhaps we just need to tighten up the wording. And I think you've sort of mentioned one aspect. It seems to me a little bit circular in the way that it's currently set up, in that the exec member sits on the committee and then the committee advises the exec member. So I think if we and I'll just say all of this with the caveat of, it is obviously very much welcome that the exec member is here for all of these meetings and to hear all of the discussion in these meetings. I would suggest we either need to make it that we refer things to the executive, make advice to the executive, or we need to remove the exec member from the committee and have the post filled, and then have the exec member in attendance to the committee to hear the discussion and then to take the advice, because otherwise it's a bit of a circular conversation. I think similarly, although sort of perhaps related in terms of membership, I'm here, I am the chair of the planning committee, and I asked to be on this committee because I'm the chair of the planning committee. I may or may not be the chair of the planning committee after May next year, but I think it is advisable that the chair of the planning committee sits on this body. May also be advisable that the vice chair also sits on here. So I wondered whether it was appropriate to just amend the membership to specify that, so that continues. And then finally, just in terms of the remit of the committee, it's sort of alluded to, but I don't think it's specified quite as broadly as I had understood that it ought to be, because obviously there's new planning policies that will come forward that are to be discussed here, and obviously the remit which is around the local plan. I had understood that there may be occasions. I'm trying to think of a good example, and I'm afraid I haven't got one. But I know that we've had occasion at planning committee where there's been little bits of planning policy that are subjective, and that sometimes we've found that officers have sort of decided that a number is appropriate to apply. So this isn't exactly the right example, but it would be something like the number of parking spaces that should be associated with HMOs, or the number of cycle racks that should be associated with dwellings, or those sorts of numbers. And we've had occasion at planning committee where we've queried how that number has been arrived at, or how that decision has been arrived at. And I think it would be appropriate to refer those sorts of decisions into this committee, so that the committee can have that discussion rather than the planning committee making a policy decision, if you see what I mean. So I would just like to see if there's just a way of either adding in that to the remit, or just broadening the wording slightly around policy, so that it is not just to consider new planning policies as they come down from government or wherever else, but so that there is somewhere for the planning committee to refer things to, if they feel that there needs to be either democratic oversight or a greater understanding of some of that subjective policy.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to that? And then we'll perhaps look at some specific changes. No, Councillor Eyre.
Just giving down notes. I suppose one of them was relevant to that one, so we'll go that. Take your point about the vice chair of planning. Obviously, the chair of planning is a remunerated position. I did, for example, use the chair of planning as an example in part of the independent remuneration panel's consideration. I don't think it probably is fair to stipulate, if you say where possible, is that, but as the vice chair isn't a remunerated position and is entirely voluntary, it's quite a time-consuming role, as Councillor Fisher often points out to me in terms of some of the other vice chairs. But to add further to that, I think he would probably, I can hear him in my head now saying that.
Yeah. If there's, I'm getting the sense that some suggested amendments on those lines are appropriate. Perhaps if we look at the paper, in terms of the purpose 4.1, perhaps then an amendment to the first bullet point to include issues arising from the interpretation of policies at planning committee, or something along those lines. Would that be reasonable? We'll delegate to the officers to finalise the wording outside this meeting, if that's all right. Make sure it's sound. Yep. Would that be agreeable? Okay. On the second issue, and one that Alison obviously also flagged in her introduction, 7.1 reporting, the group will provide informal feedback second bullet point to the executive is obviously fine. It's the first one that's been suggested we actually ought to amend. Would an appropriate amendment be to provide feedback to the director of city development as the officer to whom matters are delegated in consultation with the executive member? Something along those lines? Councillor Eyre.
I fear we're disappearing down the rabbit hole. My view was always that it was an advisory group, and it was an advisory group to the executive.
Right.
So in essence, it is a group that provides a forum for debate, which that debate can then be passed on to the relevant decision makers, as it were. That's why I started thinking in my head whether it is the relevant decision makers that had tended to be the executive when it was a local plan working group. I suppose probably because the remit has expanded slightly, there are occasions where it wouldn't be the executive, it would also potentially just be the executive. So maybe if we just informal feedback to the relevant decision makers might get us around that.
Put it down as the executive and other relevant decision makers. Gary.
Chair, I'm just taking it back a little. I do wonder, for discussion, whether the exec member in this format should be an active observer, which therefore, if both myself and yourself are here, the decision makers are here for exemption where it's a full exec decision. That would resolve matters, I think, for discussion.
Not really for me to say.
Well, Councillor Crawshaw, you raised it. How do you feel?
I mean, my take is that you know, there's proportionality on the committee, so it would require a change of membership to retain the proportionality. I think if the wording of the terms of reference are that they are to give advice to, it becomes circular if the person who the advice is being received by is also part of the group that's giving the advice. So if either of those two, I think, work. I personally think it's neater along the line that Gary's just suggested, so that the exec member sits in attendance every time, hears the discussion, actively participates, and then the body presents the advice to the decision makers. That would be my personal view. But alternatively, if it's the advice to the relevant decision makers, I don't want to get too caught up in it because it's an advisory committee, but it's just, you know, what the most appropriate way of having that discussion is.
Happy to support that. I think it probably is the cleanest. Otherwise, we get back to we'll start having conversations about executive member advisory panels, and only you and I will remember those. That's the matter. Oh, Councillor Orwell.
Is because that's obviously quite a significant alteration of wording. Is it best if we bring this back to the next meeting with an agreed set of words on that, and we can pick up the other issue we've already discussed? And then there was the third issue about including in which would be in 2.2, I would have thought, or a new 2.3, the chair of planning and the vice chair where possible. Is that all right? Okay, so we'll agree that as a set of recommendations for sorry, Councillor Eyre.
That's another point.
Right, yep, sorry, apologies. Okay, so we've got three issues there that we've flagged to be taken away. Yep, okay.
So just thinking of where we've got stuck in the past in terms of, this doesn't feel to me as if it deals with what the resolutions of the committee are. And we've had lengthy discussions over the past, I think, 4 to 6 years in terms of what is the committee actually, do we come to a formal vote? Is it the position of the committee? Is it a majority with dissenting opinions? That just feel like this is an opportunity to sort of bottom that out in terms of what it is that the committee is presenting and how that is presented. It's not problematic, but you never want a situation on either side where someone comes and says the majority, the committee is unanimous. I think the committee's view was X, based on a 5-4 vote. I can't remember how many around, but even worse, based on a 4-4 vote with chairs casting vote, that then to be presented as the committee's view was X isn't really clear, and it's something we've had lots of when in both sides. I've sat on both sides of this committee and had I listened to the argument for both ways. So I just feel like this doesn't sort of sit in terms of that one. Bullet point, I'm getting PTSD now listening to you, Councillor Merritt, say 4.1 bullet point 7 subsection IEF is going back years of this. So that's it. Hopefully it's the last time I say it. 4.1 bullet point 3. I get what you mean, but actually it just says that our job is to offer informal advice, input and constructive challenge to officers and executive member. That could be on anything in fairness. I believe it is in relation to the matters within the remit of the committee. We're not just here to offer informal advice. I can't sit and say, Councillor Pavlovich, I think I will now tell you under 4.13 the thing I believe you're doing wrong in your portfolio, but that's so that probably just needs tightening a little bit to be a bit more specific. In terms of what's coming to the committee, and this is the first meeting of the committee, I've allowed that. So I did briefly, I didn't have a chance to discuss with Gary prior. We have commissioned a Greenbelt appraisal. I'm aware of that. That's out on the tender document, so that is live. Members had absolutely no insight or view or back into that. That is the type of thing I would have thought that could have, ideally, if we'd met previously, would have had a timeline of what was happening in terms of things that would have been listed on that timeline and would have been an opportunity for us to comment on that one. And then finally, just playing devil's advocate, the membership, and Councillor Corshaw flagged it to me by saying politically proportionate. If the aim of the committee is cross-party consensus, does it need to be politically proportionate? Or should it just be even numbers from each political party, which I appreciate at the moment would be difficult, Councillor Nichols.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Just on that last point, I think if it's a body of the council, it is legally obliged to be politically proportionate. But I think it depends which way it's constituted. But if it's constituted as a body of the council, which I believe it is, then the proportionality has to apply, unless we actively waive it. Sorry, I'll just in terms of the reporting, and I absolutely take your point, and you know, let's set off as we mean to you know, continue. You know, it is uncomfortable when you have situations where it's a very slim majority, and then that's presented as if this is the cross-party opinion of the council. I actually think the way that the reporting is worded at 7.1 onwards does make clear that is going to be difficult to do because it's an informal feedback. So it's not publishing decisions, it's not making reports in its own right. The outputs from the group will inform officer reports and the formal decision making. So my expectation would be that the conversations that we have here, even if it was for all, actually those two sides of that conversation would be reflected within the report, and the decision maker would ultimately weigh those decisions, you know, those considerations. Or perhaps, you know, we'll be 8-0 every time, and you know, we'll find a beautiful consensus. But I hear what you're saying, but I think as an informal body, it's or as an informal feedback body, it's less of a point of contention than perhaps a scrutiny decision on, you know, a pre-decision scrutiny or something like that.
The exec member indicated next, and then I'll come back to Councillor Eyre. Right, okay, Councillor Eyre.
Just wondering whether I'd fix the problem on in terms of that. I take your point, but informal feedback would be the committee or the committee agreed. That's informal feedback. So I just wonder if you add something in, would provide informal feedback on areas of consensus and areas of diversion to the executive member, then that gets around it.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. Having sat on previous iterations of this committee, I thought it always worked best when there was a variety of views and opinions which didn't go to a vote. I can't remember many votes of the local plan working group. Nigel can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it was areas where an individual member of that advisory group may have a specific example from their ward or from that could then be taken into account by both officers and relevant decision maker. And I am mindful that in this scenario that would be me more often than not. That it's a forum for discussion, consideration, opinions, as opposed to necessarily this is the view of the committee 5-4, 6-3, whatever. That it's a variety of views which the Democratic Services Officer will write up, and which officers will then be mindful of and will form the basis of discussions that they will have with me. But equally, again, I'm guided by the consensus of the advisory group, which may be 4-3.
No, Councillor.
So I prefer Nigel, but we're not allowed to say that. I don't think it's like to group leaders. So yeah, actually, I think I'm just carrying too many scars, Councillor Pavlovic. I'm not sure how long you've been a councillor, but it was 9 years that we submitted the local plan. So that particular period was sort of post submission of local plan. Councillor Merritt and I and Councillor Old, possibly Councillor Vassing, were on some far less pleasant and far more heated discussions. So taking, for example, we may have a debate later on, for example, on whether 400 metres or 800 metres is appropriate for a fast food takeaway. That's a relatively easy debate to discuss for officers to articulate to the executive. There was a difference of opinion amongst members of the group. Some felt this was right, some felt that was right. When we're arguing about what the objective assessed housing need of the city is in a 4.5 hour long meeting, presenting some very complex discussions around migration figures, etc., and the committee comes out with a recommendation that says this committee's view is that the assessed housing need is 762 homes per annum. That's pretty significant, and there's more likelihood that we get into those sort of debates, I think, going forward than sort of the halcyon days, as it were, when I was chairman during that particular period. So that's my own interest.
Right. Councillor Nichols.
Just to a different bullet point, 5.1, bullet point 2, Councillor Ayres benefits. And you may have touched on this earlier, actually, Councillor. You said you commissioned a Greenbelt review, but it says the review and comment on technical studies. Can this group request its own studies to take place around evidence, or is it just presented with other people's choice of evidence? Because if someone's got a point, they'll bring their own evidence to say, there you go, I've found this report on the back of Wikipedia and I'm right, as opposed to, can we say, well, hang on, we want some actual different evidence found that give us a more balanced view? Because it just says review and comment on technical studies, but it doesn't say where they come from. And so have we got our own ability to say, we want to go out and find some studies on, or is it just us to do our own studying?
Sorry, Gary.
Yes, I can answer that. Those will be our commissioned technical studies, most of which will be jointly commissioned with their oral North Yorkshire. They are outlined. If they're not, we can circulate that list, but there will be a long list of technical studies we will be commissioning. Just to answer Councillor Ayres' point, what we wouldn't be doing, or we're not intending to, is to run the commissioning documentation through this group, but the actual output of that would come to this group in effect.
Councillor.
I get that, but it's my argument with procurement always is that you get what you pay for. So if you ask for a study on a certain thing, that will, how you set that study out and the parameters you put into that will inevitably affect what comes back out at the other end. So I would have thought the committee would have sight of, even in terms of a briefing, I'm going, the intention is to commission a review of the Greenbelt. These are the parameters, this is what's in scope, this is what's not in scope, this is what we're asking for, etc. To allow us to comment and say that seems perfectly reasonable.
I know. again, Mayor Chair, I mean, I'm happy to bring a kind of a brief outline of the outcomes we're trying to procure. Obviously, the technical documentation is quite significant in terms of given documentation. We can bring an outline, if that helps.
Right, just come back to your previous contribution, Councillor Eyre, and yes, you're obviously correct about what happened with the old local plan working group prior to the actual submission of the previous local plan. And I think that's something that we do not want to go back to. I mean, frankly, sterile exchanges of views that then just in effect anticipate the same thing then happening at the executive. I don't think are where we can actually productively add to the arrangement. But you know, your suggestion about identifying areas where there is consensus and areas where there's not consensus seems quite reasonable point that I think could be incorporated in an updated version of these tweaks. You know, I think, you know, and as Councillor Pavlovic says, if you know we have a decent set of minutes that records debates and the arguments for and against particular things, I think that's probably the most constructive thing that we can contribute. So that will be my reaction to what you said. You know, I think we need to try and do it in the way that we're trying to do scrutiny now, which is not party political. It's about genuinely trying to find both where we can, you know, get consensus on issues, how we can best influence to improve things that are in development by the council, and so on. And I hope we can adopt a broadly similar approach here. Okay, Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the thing that appears missing to me in this document in terms of reference in relation to the discussion that we've been having is I would suggest there's a role for a body such as this to act as a mechanism for bringing outside views and outside expertise to offer comment. Whether that be planning officers from other local authorities or any kind of expertise to help inform how local plans work, what they're capable of achieving, to stimulate a broader view. It's been my experience over many years in this local authority that we're very inward looking. And I would have thought there would be a great value in an advisory group such as this, being able to bring people from outside this local authority to the table to help inform discussions on the content of any local plan. I'm not seeing that reflected in this document, basically.
Sorry, Alison.
Just in terms of under membership, Councillor, 2.5, it talks about additional members, officers of external specialists may be invited to attend meetings for particular items at the discretion of the chair. That was with the intention that if we needed, for example, any of our technical specialists to attend to explain the information directly, they'd be able to assist. I don't know if that covers your intention.
So you said which bullet point is that?
It's 2.5.
2.5, right, oh, yes.
If members want to make suggestions, contact me as chair in a reasonable time, and I'll talk to the officers and see what's possible. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate we don't want to labour this for too long because we've got substantive items, but 6.3, meetings will normally be held as informal member workshops and will not constitute formal committee meetings. That's what we were talking about. I think that's the point that we were making earlier, that there will be a number of opportunities for members of the committee to meet outside of these formal meetings to talk about things like scoping of technical documents, etc.
And we perhaps need to think about seating formats and other arrangements for those, because we're not exactly going down that road in terms of tonight, are we? But anyway, I think that's perhaps something to take away and think about for the next meeting. Right, I think we've achieved a reasonable degree of consensus on alterations that need to be made. So can we agree in terms of a recommendation to ask officers to take the draft terms of reference away to incorporate the points that have been made round the table tonight and bring back to the next meeting? Is that agreeable? Thank you. I'm seeing nods. So that's agreed. Thank you very much for all your contributions there. Right, let's move on to item 6. In terms of UK planning reform and requirement for a local plan scoping consultation. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. We've brought before the committee a paper to try and capture what's happening in the wider planning environment around planning reform, changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, and moving forward into our first stage of the new plan preparation, the scoping consultation. I have a presentation which I'm going to run through, if that's okay, which builds upon the paper that's in front of you. That's it. Perfect. So in terms of what's happening, we know that there's new planning reform coming. So I've just introduced that. What we do know about planning reform is that the government have changed the system. So they're wanting to speed up planning across the nationally, to make sure that there is a plan-led system in place, that there are up-to-date local plans in place to lead development, to deliver on the ambitions of the government around development, particularly around their 1.5 million homes target. They want our local plan to be delivered now in a more timely timeframe, and they've put a 30-month timetable on that process, with at least 4 months' notice prior to the commencement of that formal 30 months. What that means for us is we have to be really organised in terms of the scope that we're looking at, in terms of the management, the evidence needs that we're looking at, and moving forward with the particular stages of that process. In April, Executive endorsed the approach to initiate a new local plan based upon this timetable and what is happening. And so we're working through the process. So we're just building upon today that decision. So what we do know is they want to streamline the evidence. So we've already just mentioned evidence in the previous item, but they're setting out standards for us to follow, and there will be templated information. They're very, very clear that they want it to be proportionate. They want it to be standardised against their templates and transparent. And there's more and more information being released by national government in that at the moment, which is going on up onto their guidance web pages that we're trying to follow. But effectively, that the case still remains that it has to be proportionate to support the plan through the examination process, and it so therefore needs to remain robust. We do have a mandate for strengthened engagement through the process. So at the moment we're in the sort of get ready phase, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But through that we have the sort of early engagement phases of scoping. We need to identify who we're working with, and then we'll go through and we'll test each of those processes at individual stages of the timetable. The planning reform process also asks us to be a lot more digital and transparent. So they've been very clear that we can't just upload a PDF onto onto our website and ask people to comment on it. They want us to be much more interactive. They want our maps to be digitally enabled so people can zoom in, understand policy a lot better, and understand what happens in their area and what's relevant to them. So we're looking at those digital platforms to how we consult and ensuring we embed that in the process. They're also asking us to focus on delivery. So making sure that we're showing really deliverable aspects of planning policy and how that relates to sites in particular across the city. Weighing in obviously the provision of infrastructure, which is a very strong emphasis, and how viable and deliverable those ambitions are. And as part of the new planning reform, you'll have heard that there'll be a spatial development strategy developed by the York North Yorkshire Combined Authority. They're looking at an 18-month timetable for that preparation. They're still awaiting some of their legislation to move forward, but we're already working with them to understand the scope of what that may be at a strategic regional level. As part of the comprehensive suite of updates, government have released key changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. So a consultation document went out in December, and whilst we don't quite know what's going to be released this summer, which is their intention, we do know that what their intentions are as part of this document, and they were very clear in their consultation version. So I've borrowed some slides from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government presentation to just talk through those, which is why they're applicable to our scoping scoping of the local plan. So there, the NPPF is going to look very different. They want to really present the NPPF much more clearly, so in a policy format, so it'll read much more like a policy document. And the policies will look a lot more like the policies you'd be used to using in the local plan, so very positively framed around what will be supported for development and what rather than what won't be supported. And it's going to be very clear about what are decision-making policies and what are plan-led policies, working and how they work together. But ultimately, they're all working towards that one goal aligned with the planning reform about development growth. One of the things that they're looking at is really streamlining the chapters. There's been some criticism of the NPPF around how it works together. So they're trying to reorder that. They're trying to look at, like I say, that how those policies work together. They're looking at revising the presumption in favour of sustainable development to make that a bit clearer, and reflect on things like the brownfield first approach. They're changing quite a significant thing for us, because we don't have settlement boundaries, but they're looking at how development will be permitted inside settlements and outside of settlements. And then they're trying to bring in all the extra guidance that they've been releasing incrementally, such as the updated Greenbelt guidance to reflect on the grey belt. So that's an important addition to the framework. The plan making policies from our perspective, they're much clearer in their expectations. We're not going to be permitted to duplicate policies set out in the new National Planning Policy Framework, which will affect how we look at policies in the local plan. We would be able to reflect on them, we'd be able to localise certain aspects of them, but certainly things that they're trying to bring into the national policy, anything across different local planning authorities, a consistent approach. So, for example, thinking about listed buildings, for example, that's a consistent approach, nationally legislated across all relevant to all authorities. If that's in the national policy, then we don't need to repeat that at the local level, unless we have something localised that we need to deal with, particularly. They're talking to us about revising the duty to cooperate. So they've abolished duty to cooperate essentially and bringing in effective cooperation. So we still need to work with our neighbouring authorities. We still need to understand what they're looking at in terms of their development needs, pressures, cross-boundary issues. And so we're working quite closely with North Yorkshire and the Mayor Combined Authority to look at those issues starting from now. What they're very keen on, though, is to support us in saying we can still have local standards. So there are aspects to our local standards and how we deal with different issues that we need to be much more clear on. And they strongly bring that out, particularly around allocations and land use at the local level. Just a little bit more on those locational policies. The reason I've flagged that particularly is we look at a sustainable model at the moment. So we haven't identified a settlement hierarchy, and we don't have defined settlement limits at the moment. That was a big change from the previous plan in 2005 to the plan we've adopted. We'll have to go back and review that and look at those settlement limits, and what would be applied, and then like I said, the national policy has a presumption of what would be supported with inside different boundaries and as well as outside those different boundaries. That's something that we'll need to look at, and we'll be bringing back consideration of maybe a methodology of how to do that as we proceed through the process. So just sort of reviewing why we need to look at a new local plan now. The planning, the changes in planning reform and changes to the NPPF are really reshaping what we understand the local plan should look like and needs to include. And in order for us to stay robust with our decision making, we need to respond quickly to that. And it means we'll have better and more robust decision making. We'll be able to also embed some of the strategies that have come forward since the submission of the local plan. So I'm quite conscious, for example, that our agreed 10-year strategy isn't embedded in our adopted local plan at the moment. That came forward after we submit the plan. So there's a real opportunity here to embed things that have happened since we went into examination and adopted the plan into this new approach. One of the things that has driven us as well is that the government made some funding available for us to proceed. And by being an early adopter of the new system, we've been able to harness that funding to move forward, which has been very welcome. In terms of the local plan scoping consultation, so it's the first requirement as part of the lead-in to the 30-month process. So this is the MHCLG's diagram around what happens before we trigger the 30 months. And what they're inviting us to do is to go out and ask people, what do we need in the consultation? What do we need in the local plan? What direction should it be? What vision should we have for spatial development across the city? How should we craft that vision? Who should we be engaging with? So that's the stage we're at the moment, and I can run you through a little bit more around that. So in terms of the actual process for where we are at the moment, this diagram is the 30-month plan making process. The top red boxes are the key stages that we need to go through, including a new gateway process. Each of those gateways have different trigger points. So once we formally notify for our 4 months notice, which will be later this month, we will officially be able to go through our gateway 1 in November this year. And then gateway 2, we would, prior to moving forward with the plan, we need to talk to the planning inspectorate about whether or not we've got any, what our plan is looking like. They would share any concerns or opportunities that we may wish to explore at gateway 2. We'd incorporate those back into the plan. So those gateways are an opportunity for us to keep going and get in a big change from the previous system where we had one big examination at the end. This gives us incremental advice from the planning inspectorate as we move through the process. So hopefully, when we get to the submission stage, which is at month 29, we move through to adoption quite quickly from towards the end of that process. So adoption through the examination process, submission through the examination process is very quick, with adoption following shortly after. The boxes at the bottom of the diagram in blue are the key consultation points with the public that we'd be able to ask them more specifically about the plan. So the first consultation point is the scoping, and that will be starting, I'm hoping, by the end of this month or early July. And then we would be consulting on the draft plan summer next year, with the final plan the summer following. And then obviously there'd be opportunities for public participation at the examination session as well. And we'd expect to be people to come and support us as they did through the last round of examination. Just in terms of overlaying the York and North Yorkshire Spatial Development Strategy, we know that they're starting their process at the moment. I think they still need to do a formal notification process and work through. But like I said, their process is around 18 months. Yet to be confirmed in terms of specific timetable. But hopefully their plan will be adopted ahead of ours so we can dovetail really nicely into that process. But it does mean we need to work very closely together to make sure our two approaches are aligned. So the approach we've taken to looking at the scoping consultation, so scoping of the scoping, if that makes sense, forgive me, is the core approach. So we've been looking at, well, what does our plan currently do? What does our evidence base currently say? What is new in terms of our known evidence, and what are the key influences on the approach to those different subjects? What are the key challenges that come out of that scoping exercise, and have we, and then questions to draw out some answers and conclusions that we've come to. And the topics we've explored are very much based on the topics we've currently included in the plan. We think that we think that we've covered the majority of topics as part of this. We want it to be proportionate at this stage to try and gather evidence on as many topics as relevant as possible, but be proportionate in the scope and response. So the key thing for us that we've tried to identify is, in some cases, there may be continuity of that evidence and continuity of the approach, and that's quite important. For example, some of our heritage evidence, a heritage topic paper, for example, the principles within that probably remain the same, and their influence on our policy planning will remain the same. But in other areas, to pick up on Greenbelt, for example, may significantly change as a result of some of that evidence. In terms of the questions, one of the things we're trying to focus on is, have we captured the right challenge for the plan, for the new plan? And we are aware that we're slightly ahead of the release of the new NPPF, so there will need to be some reflection of this once that's released this summer. But it's really important to us that we capture that right challenge. And we have included the challenges that we'd identified at Annex B in the report at the moment. But not just have we captured the challenge, is there anything missing? Is there any gaps in evidence? Is there any a lot of the questions that we've identified are also phrased around, is there any evidence that other people can provide to us that we've not maybe thought of or looked at that would be relevant to our policy approach? And trying to identify and how we use that as well. And also looking at, we've got a section on sort of the introductory process of this and why, the background, why we're doing it. We're also trying to pick up on the equalities as well, and making sure that we're covering our duty in terms of that, and who we consult and how we consult with them. So there are questions around the actual consultation process itself. In terms of who we'd like to engage with through the scoping process, the legislation states that we must invite representation from general consultation bodies that we consider appropriate, and usually those are put out, as Natural England, Historic England, those consultation bodies, specific consultation bodies that we've interpreted, neighbouring authorities, interest groups, that sort of thing. At this stage, we're not obliged. We're obliged to release it so that anyone can respond to the consultation, but we're not obliged to target anyone else or the general public, but we do intend to do that. So we're developing a comms an engagement strategy with our communications team at the moment to make sure that we actually do engage the public as part of this process, and we're trying to engage as many people as possible, or who are trying to gain as much interest as possible in the process. Part of this is also making sure that people have an opportunity to sign up for further updates, so that they can tell us and specify when and at what point they want to be engaged and told about different aspects of this process. So they could sign up, for example, to hear about all consultations. They could sign up just to hear about the outcome of the adoption in 3 years' time. So we're very keen to make sure that that's embedded in our approach. And as part of that engagement strategy, what we're looking at is a sort of strategic overview aligned with our statement of community involvement, but also doing a really detailed approach for each stage, so that we can really hone in on and make sure that we're capturing all the relevant parties at each of the different stages of consultation that I outlined earlier. One of the key things that I was hoping we could discuss or have an outcome from today is whether you think we are approaching the scoping consultation in the right way, and have we considered it, is this the right approach that we should be taking, and the level of detail, and whether you think it's proportionate. Just in terms of next steps, we're going to take the feedback from today and look and review the challenges and questions and the approach that we've taken to that scoping documentation. There's more detail that's been presented here in the background to that. And we'll be looking at incorporating that feedback. We're going to be setting the date for the consultation and formally notifying, and that formal notification is delegated to Gary as Director of City Development in consultation with Councillor Pavlovic. So that will be an officer decision that will be published to formally notify, and we'll put that up on our website as our formal notification. We're then going to be finalising our engagement strategy and making sure that's fit for purpose. That's also subject to an officer decision. And we're preparing and I'm interested in terms of the previous item around items to come to this group, because we need to start looking at that regular meeting of the group and what will be involved and how we'll bring different items to you for discussion. But we will, as officers, be preparing and going into that consultation, listening to the views that are coming back to us. We'll be collating that evidence, and part of the first process that we need to look at for the first gateway is writing up that consultation response of what everyone has told us in terms of scoping and visioning for the plan, and that will set the tone for how we proceed with the local plan in detail.
Okay, thank you very much for that comprehensive introduction. So, members, it's over to ourselves. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. Month 30 finishes with the inspector's report. Does government have any involvement then? Do they automatically accept what's happening, what's proposed? Seeing that it took 7 years to get the last one through government.
So at month 30, so it will have gone through the planning inspectorate's examination. We'll receive the outcomes of the inspector's recommendations, as we did previously, to inform the output of the local plan. And in order to, my understanding is that the process would still be that we would need to accept the inspector's recommendations and modifications to the plan to make it robust and adoptable. They would let us know whether they felt that we could adopt it at that point in time.
But no involvement of government?
The planning inspectorate are the government's representatives for planning at that point in time. So they are, we submit our plan to the Secretary of State for that examination. He appoints the planning inspectorate directly to examine our plan. So they effectively work on behalf of the Secretary of State.
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Didn't want to start by breaking consensus, but at this point I'll probably start with that and move on to something a bit more productive. I think the problem with this paper is that it addresses the how, not the why. And there was one single slide in amongst there about why we're doing this. Sort of wrote over the one within the guidance that says start preparing a new plan 5 years after you adopted the previous plan. And I'm going to not go into that particular debate here. I've been led by the chair in terms of finding consensus, not disagreement. I fundamentally disagree with that proposal. I think we should have been here months ago discussing the why and having that as a general and having a consensus to whether we as a group agreed on the why we're doing it before we got down to the level of the first paper we had, which is how are we going to do it. And as it says in the paper, the executive have decided this. So will you comment on how we're going to do it? So that's not an auspicious start to this particular group, but I shall move on from those particular ones into three comments, because we are kind of limited in what we can ask you about, because it is about, are we doing this the right way? And it's pretty much prescribed by government how we do it. So it's a bit of a difficult exercise for us to add input into this one. So I shall try my best. The first question I had was around the cost that we will be incurring. So the two particular ones I'm interested in is we have Gateway 1 in November 2026, what are the likely costs of running this through to Gateway 1, and then the key one after that one, completely coincidentally in June 2027, the month after council elections, what will be the further expense from Gateway 1 through to the intended launch of that consultation in June 2027. In terms of the slides you put up, there was talk of 21 days, which I can't believe that was even on the slide. 6 weeks is not enough. And I would suggest we should never be doing any consultation that isn't at least a minimum of 8 weeks. And that's 8 weeks excluding any school holidays. or holiday periods. And then in terms of Annex B, the key challenges, and I'm not sure where this sits. I was doing a quick flick through and because it sits across. I think the biggest challenge we have is alluded to, but not covered in this, is how do we balance general housing need versus affordable housing need? And how that sits with current policy. So we all know, and I did watch Councillor Pavlik's into conversation with the planning inspector, and the planning inspector was quite clear under current policy guidance. If you want to deliver 581 affordable homes a year, you need to be delivering in the region of 2,500 homes a year, which far outstrips the identified need in the city. So I think we all probably are in agreement that we do need, I might argue slightly less than 581, having read the inspector's report, and is suggesting it might be nearer 5 foot, but we're not getting into that one in terms of that. There is a significant need in the region of between 500 and 581 potentially of new affordable homes in the city. There is an identified, and the planning inspector did robustly challenge us at that inspection that we were over delivering housing in the city, and we wouldn't be able to develop the economic growth in terms of filling those houses, and potentially have a negative impact on housing in the city by overbuilding of houses. So how that, this doesn't have a specific challenge in, how do we square that circle of saying we probably need about 750 new homes a year, of which 580 of them should be affordable, and that doesn't, we don't have a way of doing that under current policy mechanisms. But obviously that sits between a lot of those different categories.
Alison, are you going to answer that, or Gary? Gary.
So if I take the finance question first, just in terms of I don't have specific costs to share with you today, but the what I can say is that we need to front load the process with commissioning of evidence base to support the new plan. I think the evidence the evidence that we have at the moment does need a refresh, so there is a a front loading there in terms of costs. The cost that we've associated then with going through to Gateway 1 through to consultation is mostly officer based, in terms of it's going to be officer intensive internally to work through the policy developments using that evidence base that we're looking at. And we've had some estimates of costs for each of those gateways in terms of the costs coming through. But there is an acknowledgement nationally that nobody quite knows how much that's going to cost, or the time in terms of the time that's going to take, for example, through using the planning inspectorate process. So we have weighed that into the costs. I think the from memory, the cost that we associated through the executive paper in April was a total of 1.8 million to get us from now to the adoption process.
Yeah, I'm trying to get that. If you can try to get us about to me, I think it has to be everything. That bit to consultation time, I need 1.8. Total last 30 months total. By the time we get to June 2027, the month after, the local council elections, how much will have been spent getting us to that point? It was the bit that I was carrying that thing. I don't want to catch that.
I think we're asking a question Alison can't answer on the spot. Is it possible that some information could be provided subsequent to the meeting, accepting that it's an estimate?
Yeah, I mean, there is a matter of a finances remit of the specific group. I mean, happy to provide what's already in the system.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, could that be reported to executive? So that it is in public domain?
Councillor Pavlik.
Thank you, Chair. I think if you're going to go down that path, then there needs to be a clear breakdown of what constitutes officer time. If 99.5% of all the costs are staff that's already employed by the council to do that job, then is it an additional cost? But they're already getting paid is the point I'm making. And as Alison's pointed out, the vast majority of the costs of doing this is existing officer time.
Our officers do have jobs, Councillor Pavlik, so that was to say that doing this costs nothing would suggest that they currently don't do anything. So I don't think that's a particularly fair assumption. They have a day job that is not involved in doing this.
As Councillor Pavlovic said, I think we are straying slightly outside our remit here. You've had an answer from the director. I'm assuming, this is a very different process from local plans as we previously knew. We had much more discretion, both in terms of the programme, but also in terms of, as you've seen from Alison's slide, in terms of what we can actually do in the local plan. So it's clear that there are going to be a lot more nationally defined policies where we're not going to have a lot of discretion. So, I think we just need to recognise we are dealing with a very different beast from what we've previously had. And in terms of housing policy, there is a housing target, national housing targets that we are obliged legally, as I understand it, to adhere to. So some of the questions that you flagged, Nigel, I'm not sure are actually in our discretion. We do need to focus on what is. Coming back to the timescale, it is a very tight timescale. So can I ask for a specific response on Councillor Ayre's point about slightly extending the 6 weeks and the issue of school holidays? I'm assuming that we basically can't cater for summer holiday extensions if we're going to meet the 30 months target. But is the 8 weeks possible?
I think the 8 weeks is technically possible if we are able to commence by the end of the month. What our key target is the Gateway 1 by the 1st of November. So we would just need to look at that and whether or not extending the consultation by an extra few weeks would hinder us in that respect.
So officers will have a look at that, and obviously we can't expect an absolute answer today. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of sort of questions that are just one general and a couple of specific things, but just on the consultation, in general terms, and this is just to say it rather than to expect a response. It does seem to me within the scoping, in general, there's lots and lots of questions that I'm not sure how your average person in the street would begin to engage with, and particularly if it's looking at all of those questions in one go. So when we're thinking about how we engage with the City of York, I've got no worries about how we engage with, developers or particular interest groups or whatever. But I think in terms of much more generally, I do think we need to think really carefully about how we can enthuse people in terms of thinking about how they'd like their city to develop, but also not just kind of bamboozling them with 101 questions that it's actually really difficult to engage with, whilst at the same time accepting that if you get reams and reams and reams and reams and reams of information back, it's very difficult for you then to digest it and make meaningful sense of it. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I think any time that can be spent on thinking about how to engage with the city in a way that the city can genuinely engage with, I think will be time well spent. Just in terms of some specifics, if I may, the thing I'm just trying to go through my notes and then on the paper. So under the housing specialist accommodation needs and specialist accommodation needs, there's a specific question which is around the local plan balancing the need for permanent housing and other types of use, such as student accommodation, short-term lets and hotels. I presume that that's where you would ask questions around short-term holiday lets. And if that is where, I just think it's probably worth making that explicitly clear, because that is something that comes up all the time on the doorstep. I know for all of us, both centrally and outer. So again, if we're going out to ask people questions, just making it really explicit, this is where you talk about short-term holiday lets, I think will be helpful. Moving through, I think it's under the economy, jobs and investment. There's a reference to vibrant high streets? You know, how do we make sure that they remain vibrant? But vibrant obviously can mean lots of different things. So does that mean really high footfall? Does it mean really profitable businesses, but actually only 5 people ever go there every day? Does it mean you know, high occupancy rates? So again, if we're going to put words like vibrant into questions, I think it's just worth spelling out what exactly we mean, because my version of a vibrant high street might look very different than somebody else's version of a vibrant high street, and so therefore the responses might be quite different. And then actually within that same section, just under cultural, it's number 5, cultural activities. So it's really important that we talk about what is currently here and what's important to the identity. It asks the question about what's currently missing, but I also think that there's a question in there about how do we protect what we have existing. So it sort of says what is important, yes, what's missing, but also how do we protect what we've currently got? Because I know that there are a number of really important cultural venues in the city that are under threat in a range of different ways, and there will be some really good ideas out there about how they can be protected, and obviously within the context of a local plan. I've got one other question, but because it's slightly different, so I realise I've given you a ton of stuff there.
I'm just wondering the best way to handle this, because if we all have lots of long lists and officers respond point by point to each, we could be here all night.
Chair, I'm not necessarily expecting an answer to those questions.
Just
I'm quite happy just to chuck them out there and say, look, please have a think about those things.
Yeah.
They're the things that I think need to be
Okay.
considered, rather than necessarily expecting a
helpful.
response back.
That's
Chair,
very
we can
helpful.
just take those on
Right.
board. I know if there's anything that is an absolute no, we'll put our hands up and reference it.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
there's nothing there that we can incorporate.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, it was just clarification on your point in terms of timescales. The 30 months doesn't start until after Gateway 1. So this period has absolutely no effect on the 30-month timetable. So I don't see why we can't do 8 excluding school holidays, but you suggested we had to hit the gateway in November. So as that isn't part of the government legislation, why November?
Our funding that we've received from government is tied to reaching Gateway 1 by no later than the 31st of October.
And how much is that?
It's £108,000.
Councillor Nichols.
Yeah, can I just pick on what Councillor Crawshaw was saying about the sort of how you get normal people involved, because it seemed like the government was interested in professional lobbyists rather than actually what the real people live in real places, which doesn't seem to be part of it at all. So I totally agree with Councillor Crawshaw that those questions need to be, you can give them 100 questions, which 10 matter massively and 90 whatever, and it's the 10 that matter that we need to get across to people. And in terms of your question, I thought yes is the answer. My worry was the fact that government seemed to be just, and I think that last answer, get it done at our pace, never mind what you want, which again is just dictatorial from the top, rather than us lot saying, well, there's 108 grand, you go at our pace. The question which you made up to answer that is what happens if we do slip? Because it's their timetable, not our timetable, which is based on what they think that you can do and the time that you've got. They've no idea, don't suppose they've asked, are you busy? Is anybody going on holiday? Whatever. So if we start slipping, what's the consequences? They're just like 2 points for now.
If you want to come back on that particular question, Alison.
Yes, certainly. So in terms of the requirements from the government, we're expected to keep an up-to-date timetable. We need to release that quite frequently to make sure that we're reporting on the timescales that we're going to achieve. So that will need to report any differences to a change in our timetable that will release with a formal notification. So if we are going to slip by a month, we need to recognise in that timetable early on that we are going to slip and publish that amended version. If we slip too far, we are going to be monitored more closely by MHCLG as the government body. They're already publishing lists of local plans and their timetables on their website as part of the open data forum. But they do have powers to intervene in local authorities that are taking too long or will be aren't meeting the progress that they have put in their timetables. And they have been quite clear that they will use their intervention powers to move things on. Or if there is an issue that is, for example, if there is an issue that's being debated that cannot be resolved at the local level, they are happy to use those intervention powers to make the decision for the council to move on a particular issue. And they are using those powers elsewhere in the country in terms of those interventions, and the Secretary of State has been issuing letters to that effect.
Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. Where do parish councils sit in the consultation process?
So parish councils we would see as general consultees as part of the process. So we would be they would be on our upfront list for consultation.
I just couldn't see anything written down specifically, so.
Okay, but sorry, is it on the same issue? Yes, Councillor Nichols.
So that goes in like Akerst and Marvis Parish Council does not meet in August, so you can write to them now, but you won't get an answer till September, and that goes back. You know, if they're going to be involved, you have to bear in mind that volunteer groups just meet. You know, they take August off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
Councillor.
just on that
Sorry,
point,
Councillor
sorry, if I may, just to be fair, we do have everybody's email addresses, and if we have tight timescales, you know, we as city councillors sometimes have to have an ad hoc meeting to discuss an important issue. Yeah, I appreciate that point, but I also think that there's a bit of a balance, isn't there, between wanting to make sure that everybody is engaged, but also, you know, if somebody's not going to meet for 10 weeks, but you give them ample notice and say, actually, this is your deadline, we'd like you to give some feedback. There is an opportunity to convene a meeting. I'm not suggesting that, you know, there's any desire to exclude parish councillors or any other groups, but I think it's getting a balance between reasonableness, isn't it? And you know, if it's an important issue like this, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, you know, we'd like your feedback. Can you arrange an ad hoc meeting?
Okay.
Chair, on the same point,
issue. All right, Councillor Orrell.
On the same, there's a big difference between the parish councils, which have a very low secretariat, to other organisations that have much more help in that respect.
It reapplies to voluntary groups as well. Nigel.
But I would also point out, parish council is a democratic institution. This isn't about the abilities of parish councillors to be able to organise and arrange a meeting and discuss between themselves. It's for the parish, through their parish council, to be able to do that. So to get that information to the parish, for them to be able to then convene a meeting, for them to be able to then inform the public and say, okay, the council have given us 7 days notice for you to attend the meeting and make your views known. So we as parish councillors can formulate our own response. So let's not do this a disservice. It's a far more complicated process than just a parish councillor responding to an email.
I think
I'm just being super quick. We're in public. This is a public
meeting
meeting right now. So I would hope that any interested parish councillors who have an interest in planning, of which many do, I know that they do, and I would hope that they would see this as the very first part, the starting gun on this. This is now in the public domain, that this will be coming down the line. And that's, you know, it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that it's passed out to all of those different groups that we want to ensure are engaged in this consultation. I take your point utterly in terms of the differing levels of support. My granddad was a parish councillor for years, but I also think they're a group of people who are genuinely engaged in their communities and will want to be engaged in this.
Okay, let's move on. We know that parish councils are important, so are voluntary bodies, and getting the maximum time we can. I'm sure officers have heard the message, but it's got to be practical. Yeah. Okay. I think Councillor Vassie was next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. So my comment on public consultation is this. We 2 years ago went through a big conversation on climate change. In my view, it was very poor, largely because the big conversation is a completely unrepresentative sample of people in the city. So some 65% of them are over 60. I think there were only 10% of them who were between 18 and 40. So any process that goes on has got to be dramatically different. We had a lot of argy-bargy about that when the big conversation was happening. I think we learned a lot of valuable lessons. And by the end of it, we were hearing from young parents and students and people who've come to the city recently, etc., etc. But as it started out, it was the usual stuff of just listening to a bunch of old, essentially, I have to say it the way it is, and I can because I'm one of them, old white men telling people what they thought the city deserved. And I think if we're going to be serious about this, we've got to make sure we hear other people's views. So that was my first point. The question I have is, will this document be allowed to go beyond the terms and standards set out in the NPPF? One of the things I regret from the past 14 months is that when we all agreed this local plan at the beginning of last year, there was talk at that time of advancing special planning documents and picking on a number of items that we all thought were important and needed dealing with, whether it was biodiversity or construction or transport, active travel. There were a number of issues raised. And we seem to have moved away from that to this refresh of the local plan. So that's what's happening. But part of the argument that was made about the value of SPDs was that it would give us teeth to our existing local plan and enable us to enforce better standards, because local plans are by their nature vague. So I really would like to know whether this is going to be a mechanism that enables us to do better. And the last point I'd make, if I can, because I'll only make one intervention, Chair, is on the Annex B. One of the things that surprises me and shocks me, I have to say, is I don't see the word sustainable construction within it, in the document at all. I hear lots of other things being raised that are important, and it relates to what I'm saying about SPDs, the business of raising the environmental construction standard of buildings appears invisible in this document. I may have missed it. And similarly, there's almost nothing on biodiversity. So I think there are challenges within the annex and questions that I would certainly like to see added.
Gary.
Just to answer the question around the system. So I think Chair and Alison made it very clear in terms of system is a very controlled system. We will have a certain degree of discretion. We don't know what that is as yet, but there'll be a set of standard central policies from government, and we will have discretion on a number of local policies. What that quantum of discretion is yet, we need to see the actual documentation. SPDs do not exist within the current framework. There is provision for supplementary documentation, which will be localized guidance. Again, that won't have much statutory weighting in reality. So the intention of this whole system is to shift to a national system that effectively then has some localized policies. So the answer to your question is there'll be less localized discretion, less ability in reality. In terms of some of the detail, we'll pick up the comments. I mean, it is there in terms of the standard housing requirements and such like, but we'll make sure that it's clearer within the questions around biodiversity and housing standards. Although there is a very clear dialogue within the consultation material, is that there'll be an expectation that the government will take a greater control of housing standards and through building control, and that planning will play a lesser role in that. Notwithstanding, we're expecting to be able to put some local documentation around that, but it will be less of a planning matter, more of a building control matter.
If I can just respond, Chair, thank you for that. I mean, it sort of begs the question, what are we doing this for? Because if the creation of a local plan is about finding out what the public and what the community want, and then driving towards that and recognizing the particular needs of particular places, our particular investment in our history, in our transport, in our biodiversity, whatever. If we have less opportunity to actually do things, this 30-month period may prove 29 months too long.
Yeah, as I said, it's a very different beast from the local plans that we knew previously. We have a lot less discretion if this NPPF, as it looks, is going to come into effect. So next on the list was Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the work that's gone into the process so far. You know, I share a lot of concerns that have been raised by Councillor Croshaw and Councillor Vassy around consultations and getting good quality information. What you've put in the scoping document for us to review, I've got really high assurance that those are the questions we would like to hear the views of York residents, but the quality of what we get back is always a concern. So I'd expect, and I'm sure you are, preparing statutorily to go out to representative bodies across the board. I'm sure you've got all the lists from various chapters. I have one question specifically on the spatial strategy and what the combined authority are doing and how we are working with them, and specifically on who is defining what is the green belt, whose responsibility is that for, say, York's local authority area being within the combined authority area, and similarly for the grey, what is going to be defined as grey belt. How are we working together on that, and whose document or whose decision is the top of the hierarchy?
So, if kind of else can come in, so we are working collectively together. We're jointly commissioning the evidence base, but then in effect, if there's the joint commission element, then there's the independent elements. The combined authority, in effect, produces the spatial strategy, which identifies the spatial, economic, and investment strategy, and also spatial allocation of housing, employment, etc. It doesn't actually define the boundaries, but could define allocations within. It could define allocations within the green belt. The spatial strategy could broadly define those expectations. It would be for us to follow the spatial strategy. So we have to have a strategic alignment to the spatial strategy. If we're not, and the key part of the process, and just to stress Alison's point, is there is significant step in position from the inspectorate. So the inspector will ensure that it will align with the spatial strategy fundamentally. In a world, I mean, there used to be spatial strategies, regional spatial strategies, etc. And so this isn't something new. In fact, it was taken out over a decade ago. So in a world, in the normal world, is that spatial strategy would come first, and then you'd follow up with your local plans. But the reality is the timeframes we're being set are such that we have to align them all at the same time. I mean, there could be some very interesting conversations across the country around the alignment of spatial strategy and also local plans, because whilst planning is not supposed to be political, it is, because it is all about people and people who live in place. So fundamentally, there will be differentials that will need to be balanced through the process. But to answer your question, is the spatial strategy fundamentally is the plan that we need to follow.
Just going back perhaps to the earlier argument about timescales, is not one of the big advantage of doing the timescales for our local plan that we actually have the evidence and the opinion in terms of influencing what goes into that spatial strategy, which we wouldn't if we weren't doing it to this timescale.
Fundamentally, yeah. And we'll if we move correctly within these timeframes, we will be defining the spatial strategy. Otherwise, we'd have to absolutely follow it.
Yeah. So I think that's actually one of the other things we need to bear in mind about this timescale. Okay, right. I think we've made a number of comments. Sorry, Nigel.
One very brief one, Chair, because I was just quickly scanning. I think there was some mention of holiday lets, etc. But also there's vacant properties. That's something else that isn't in there. So I was trying to do a quick scan. So 1,000, the last thing I could find, 1,000 of the 93,000 properties in York were actually vacant. So is there something to put into those challenges about how we maximise the stock, both in terms of maintaining family homes over holiday lets, etc., but also making sure that we're getting all best use of the stock we have, making sure vacant homes are back into use and or are repurposed in a way that is most efficient for what we need in the city.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we've given officers and the executive member quite a lot of points to think about. So thank you for everyone's contribution on that. So we're asked to endorse the proposed approach. And scoping conversation is the formal stage in the first formal stage in the preparation of the new local plan. So are we happy with that recommendation? And I think obviously taking into account the comments that have been made around the table. Okay, thank you. Right, can I suggest we have a brief couple of minutes break, a 5-minute break, if you don't mind. And then we'll come back and deal with the further items on the agenda. Right, thank you, members. So we're all back now, and we'll move to agenda item 7, the implementation of non-statutory planning guidance. Sorry, Alison, are you introducing this?
It's me. All right. Yes, it's me. Sorry. Okay. Non-statutory planning guidance. Then why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it to support implementation of the adopted plan. So that thing of adding detail to the policies we've got. So moving away from supplementary planning documents, as it says there, government have said after 30th of June this year, we can no longer adopt new supplementary planning documents. And we weren't at the stage where we could do it. There's a statutory process for adopting a supplementary planning documents. And although we were en route to drafting them, we were not at the stage where we could take them out to the statutory consultation that they required. But we had an executive decision in April, and it was agreed that we were pivoting to making these non-statutory planning guidance. They do a similar job. They support implementation of the policies in the plan. They carry material weight. They're quicker. And because we're taking them through this process, we are doing some consultation, mostly internal consultation, but there is consultation, and we are intending taking on board your comments now and then moving forward to an executive member decision to endorse them before we publish them. So this all adds weight. There would be material considerations in decision making. They're helping with consistency by making it clear what we're expecting with each policy they are addressing. And then also it's work that we can carry forward into the new local plan, as we've said. The new local plan will be both shorter and carry more local detail. So the hope is that detail from these statutory planning guidance documents could be non-statutory, sorry, could be carried forward into policies in the plan if appropriate. So where have we got to so far? We've drafted, so they have been developed in collaboration with technical officers. Andrew's here from housing to talk about the affordable housing or answer questions if there are any. Development management have been consulted. We've done targeted consultation, mostly internally, but also we've spoken to registered providers about the affordable housing guidance. Then, as I've said, moving on to the executive member to endorse, and this is purely to ensure we get the maximum weight attributed to the guidance when we're looking at making decisions based on it, following which we'll be publishing it on the website. And there's some continued development of further non-statutory guidance. Moving swiftly on. So we've got 5 pieces of different guidance to talk through today. I'm going to do it really quickly, so I can just take comments really. First one, affordable housing. So this is addressing policy H10 in the local plan. It's got, I think you've got copies of it in the annexes. So Annex A, it's got information on the expected tenure mix and preferred housing mix. It explains things like the policy refers to the local housing needs assessment and how that will be the most up to date. So we are looking at getting new evidence base. And so when we get the new evidence base around housing needs, that will still be relevant to consideration against policy H10. We've got links to best practice. There's some signposting, some stuff around accessible homes, and the housing standard developed by the Registered Providers Partnership. Also information about quality and design expectations for specifically affordable housing. And then just information about viability considerations and some worked examples about vacant building credit, just for clarity. Next one, hot food takeaways. This one's slightly different because it isn't built off local plan policy. This has been developed in partnership with Public Health. It is based on policy in the National Planning Policy Framework. So paragraph 97 at the moment. It did only come into national policy, I think, in this MPPF. But in the draft one that we've had for consultation, it's carried forward. So what we're doing here in this guidance is clarifying how we'll assess planning applications for hot food takeaways in the light of what paragraph 97 says. Specifically, it's saying that we should be refusing hot food takeaways within walking distance of schools and other places children and young people congregate, unless it's within a designated town centre. So what we're doing is clarifying what we consider to be schools and other places young children, young people congregate, and what we consider to be a walking distance. We've shown that in the mapping. Hopefully the mapping will be slightly more interactive when we get it up on the website, so you'll be able to switch layers on and off and see which apply to which type of use. And then it gives guidance. So applications for hot food takeaways, which are outside those buffers, so things in the town centres and just generally outside the buffers, we're giving some guidance on how we consider the impacts of hot food takeaways when we'd be assessing applications for them. And it also encourages submission of health impact assessments for hot food takeaways. Next guidance is on master planning and garden villages. This has been developed with our design and conservation development management teams, specifically really around expectations of master planning on the strategic policies. So I think all the strategic sites, the policy requires that they're comprehensively master planned. And what we're trying to do with this guidance is make clear what we expect a master plan to look like and what we expect garden villages to address. So again, this is a lot of signposting to best practice, information from Homes England, the Town and Country Planning Association. It encourages master planning at the earlier stages, and it would be, I think it makes clear that it's relevant to any kind of larger sites coming forward with a master planned approach. Next one's self-build. Yeah, I'm on the right one. So this is policy H4 of the plan. It's been developed in collaboration with the self-build housing officers. It fairly well does what it says on the tin. I think mostly it's building on experience from delivery of self-build plots so far. So issues that have come up and just need some clarification. So parameters about how sites are built out and phasing, ensuring that self-build plots have utilities early doors so people can get on with that. But it gives all that guidance so developers know what we expect with those self-build plots. And last one, houses in multiple occupation. So this is, again, slightly different in the updating the existing draft houses and multiple occupation supplementary planning document. So what we've done is policy, which was in that previous draft document, is now adopted policy in the local plan. So we've removed the information that's now in the adopted plan policy H8. And just kept information that clarified how we did the calculations for the thresholds, and then given some more information about residential amenity. So these are the things that development management officers are considering when they're assessing new proposals, when you've got past the threshold considerations and you're looking at the impact it actually has of the HMO. And it gives some more detail for developers. So when they're looking at submitting applications for HMOs, there's some detail here of what we expect them to be achieving. And finally, next steps. So once we've come here, we'll further review these comments and any that we've had, we have still some consultation ongoing. So include those. The EMDS session is, sorry, the executive member decision session is 7th of July, after which we're planning to publish the guidance as soon as possible. We do have, as I've said, further guidance in preparation, something on health impact assessment, working with public health colleagues, and that's policy HW7, I think that relates to. We're looking at short-term housing. Let's doing something on that, looking at previous planning appeals and putting some guidance together and the kind of considerations that development management are looking at when they're assessing applications. We have substantially complete some short pieces on supported and specialist housing, accessibility in relation to housing, and co-living development as just something that's coming up, just to be clear on that. Also, we're considering working further with the Gypsy and Traveller pitch design coming up. And finally, I think we've been doing SPD on sustainable design construction. So we're wondering about pivoting that to more of a signposting thing, changes in building regs that we've already kind of alluded to. Make it probably more pertinent to make it a signposting exercise. There's plenty of information out there. I think we probably just need to point people to the right place. And we're aiming there to bring those extra pieces back here before October executive member decision session. I think that's me.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Can I suggest we first of all deal with any questions on the covering paper, the overall approach, and then we'll look at each of the annex documents one by one. So, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a general point, because obviously the executive did agree, and I went back and checked your recommendation to move from the SPDs to SPGs, or is that the D to the G from? But they didn't change the prioritisation process. So that was housing, planning for health, planning for green infrastructure, planning for York Gypsy travellers, climate change, and transport. They have not translated into what's actually happened. So it's just confused as to when is prioritisation not prioritisation, and when did things such as hot food takeaways suddenly pop up as being more significant than the documents that the executive had specifically prioritised and requested.
So I think, as I've said, we had some ongoing work on these. They're listed, aren't they? Paragraph 4 of the report, the SPDs. We had some work ongoing, and this is just drawing elements out of the bits that were most progressed, really. So the hot food takeaways one was coming in the health SPD. Effectively, affordable housing was under housing. So it is that we're just pulling out smaller elements of the work that we had said we were going to do.
Councillor Eyre, I'm not sure this is really pertinent to us. This might be pertinent to the executive, but, you know, can we focus on the construction?
But it's to the heart of the matter, because planning for health supplementary was prioritised because we need the contributions and we need the evidence to enable us to provide the infrastructure. It wasn't about public health, wasn't part of that. This was about how we make sure that we're getting contributions from developers for pharmacies and GP surgeries. That I'm not sure how, and the paper, it's in the paper, it says the executive agreed to move from the SPD to the SPG, not to say, well, just don't continue, just drop what you're doing with the ones that you're doing and move on to producing something completely different.
So just to correct that, the planning for health documentation wouldn't have been it wasn't intentional to include anything around the 106 contribution elements. That's a separate strand that we're engaging with the health sector on, because one of the key issues, the policies are already there to be fair, in the local plan to actually extract the relevant funds, one of the key issues is that the sector wasn't asking for the localities to invest the funds in. So that's the piece of work we're doing separately. So we can then present to planning those sites in which the 106 funding would go into. So that's something totally different. I totally concur that it's really important because actually we need that health investment. The planning for health was a much wider documentation around the generalities of health, of which this was one part of. I think we've got to see this as a bit of an album we were producing that had a few demos fundamentally, and the planning system's totally changed, and therefore we're not releasing everything because fundamentally it's not going to be relevant in the new planning system. Some of the stuff that we've done is actually really quite important, was important to yourselves when developing the local plan. Will be important because the local plan will still be live for some time, so we're releasing those sections that have been produced to a level that of a quality that can be released, but not then putting a load of resource into getting the other ones up to scratch because it would just be wasted.
Yeah, thank you. Just a sort of a general and then a specific. So my understanding is, and this in a way perhaps speaks to something of Councillor Vassey's point earlier around SPDs. So we sort of the legislative framework has changed. We can no longer adopt SPDs. That's a fundamental place that we find ourselves in. And so we will then be having these supplementary guidance documents, and they carry material weight. And my understanding is that as soon as they're adopted, they sort of effectively carry material weight from that point. So if we're sitting in a planning meeting, we can refer back to that document and we can say, right, policy says X, therefore. So I think my sense is that if we can stick to that faster to produce an update and still a material consideration in planning, then actually some of what I think we all want to see happening in terms of our decision making in planning committees will be easier to enact what we want to see happening locally, because we'll see that material weight within those things. And I'm seeing you all nodding, so in a way you don't need to respond to that. That's really good. On the specific thing, and I appreciate that, you know, I haven't been part of executive decisions, and I appreciate, you know, some of what's been said around prioritising and those sort of things. This is just a plea, really. I find often it's really difficult when you have new developments that are not accessible. And I know that within some of the specific stuff we're going to come on to, there is stuff around M1, 2, 3, 4 and those sort of things. But I'm thinking in terms of, you know, a new hotel that has a little step at the front, and so it nominally is step free, but it's actually only step free to the boundary, and once you're on that red line, there's, you know, that little ridge that means it isn't actually accessible. And obviously we've talked at great length in committee around tactile paving and, you know, all of those sort of things, some of which is national, some of which is local. So it's just a plea, really, that when we're developing these documents, particularly around health and around housing, anything that we can do to give planning committee hooks to make sure that the applications coming forward are fully, genuinely accessible for now and the future. Obviously, we want to see as many houses delivered, but also accessible and all the rest of it. But it's things like those public spaces that might meet the minimum threshold, but actually we want to make sure that they are as fully accessible as they possibly can be. So it's just a plea, really, if that can be woven into all of these different policies as they come forward.
Okay, Councillor Eyre.
Sorry to go back, Chair. It's wonderful having the internet and going back. So I've actually found the exec paper from 2024 on the Planning for Health SPD that should be the SPG. The first point that it comes to is policy HW3, built sports facilities, evidence base of existing facilities to inform development management decisions making and the allocation and use of developer contributions. Second point, policy HW5, healthcare services, provides updated details of citywide provision to inform development management decision making and the allocation and use of developer contributions. That is what we've been asking for at planning forever and ever and ever. That's what we asked for under the SPDs. That's what the executive asked for in the SPDs. Our evidence base on sports facilities is about 15 years out of date. That's what we were expecting to be done. Our evidence base on healthcare facilities is non-existent. We rely entirely on what was then the CCG, what will now be the place-based partnerships, can cobble together now they've been gutted back. That's what we were expecting this to do. Firm evidence base for us to be able to say, because we come to planning and we've all sat around here on planning and we say we need a GP surgery, and the answer from officers is nope, there's absolutely no evidence base that says you need this. There's no evidence base for that. Therefore, we cannot request contribution. So this was, and that's 2024 executive. It's not that long ago. That was the specific scope of the health policy. So we've gone from having a detailed evidence base of what healthcare needs we have in the city, what sport and open space we need, to just a simple thing that says no takeaways 800 metres from anywhere.
Just to reassure you, councillor, the built sports provision, the study is ongoing. It's currently with national bodies for sign off and should be coming back through the system for sign off as an evidence base. It's currently, I understand, with the national agencies for sign off. So that is coming. We're all expecting that, eagerly awaited. In terms of looking at the healthcare policies, and I understand, I can see the scope before me as well. We will be looking at this issue further as part of the evidence base. So those ongoing programmes across the council looking at health at the moment, we're looking at that as part of the overall provision across the city, what the needs is. We'll be able to revisit that as part of this process and be able to build in more detail around that policy as part of the developing local plan. So I think that will emerge. If there's anything that we can release ahead of that to support the current implementation of the policy, we're able to do so as part of the non-statutory guidance, and we can respond to that issue as far as we can. But we can certainly take that issue away, I think, and discuss how to approach it.
And just to add, we have had for the last 12 months a team working with the health sector to identify those needs. So we are in a much better place, accepting that that's not published documentation at this stage. Obviously, there's been a change in the ICB infrastructure, and also there's a likely change in terms of the whole health infrastructure, particularly more mayoral engagement. So we need to factor that in as well.
Councillor Bassey.
Oh,
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a different point, but so I'll just comment on the master planning garden village guidance. So I was unaware of this until this report appeared.
Sorry, Christian, I was trying to sort the overview issues before we go on.
Oh, we're not going into
before we go to the annex.
Oh, okay.
Well, mine's on this, Chair. It's just following up from what Johnny was saying, and I think the implication, it will definitely be policy of when these non-statutory guidance are decided. There will be. Reason I ask is, going back a few months to a planning application we dealt with, members were asking questions all the time, and the answer from the agent was, it's within policy. So if that can help us deal with those issues, that will be, it is definitely going to be policy.
So it's material consideration to planning. Obviously, the core policies are in the local plan.
Right.
That this has a weighting in terms of the material consideration, is therefore an extension of the policy in the local plan, and provides guidance.
Okay.
Probably as close as I can get.
Sorry. Thank you, Gary. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to be corrected. So even had there been a supplementary planning document, that would have been a guide. It wouldn't have been policy. The policy is the ones that are outlined in the local plan. So this is guidance. These are guidance. That would also have been guidance as an SPD. The only policy that exists is the policy that's written into the local plan under the term policy.
That's correct, yeah.
Can I just ask, Chair, then? So you referenced in the slides that you showed that more stuff will be coming back in November, October, November. Is that going to be considered with the same weight as the stuff we're looking for here? In which case, in a sense, what is the rush about getting this through now, while as an SPD, rather than getting it through in October? I just so the deadline is the 30th of June. We're not trying to meet that deadline.
No.
We're just saying these items are ready now, and more items are coming forward
Correct.
in November. They'll be treated the same
Yeah.
way. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Alison.
I think from a timetabling point of view, we want to make sure we're supporting the implementation of this adopted plan as soon as possible, and programming it so that we can dovetail that in as the work ramps up on the new local plan. We have tried to implement this plan as far as possible. We will still respond to this plan as necessary through that process, but it means that we can support the adoption of the adopted local plan as much as possible sooner.
Okay. Right. If we've answered all our questions on the covering paper, then let us move on to the draft affordable housing planning guidance. And if members have any comments on that, that's Annex A, page 71. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 points. I don't know how quick they'll be. Hopefully, be relatively quick. Start with the least controversial. I was interested in the reference to vacant building policy. I was a little bit disappointed in terms of that, but that seems to reduce our ability to get affordable housing. More you could expand on that and any more scope we have in terms of doing that one. There were no page numbers I've just looked at. So I've got in section 7 or paragraph 7, in terms of the housing mix, it refers to an external document, but doesn't link to that external document. So it says it's based on the local housing needs assessment. Would perhaps be helpful for members of the public to be able, I think elsewhere it does everywhere does link out very helpfully to places that you need to go. That one didn't, in terms of that one. And it was that issue of housing mix that, and I'll try to be as uncontroversial as I possibly can. I'll please Councillor Pavlovic, but that housing mix was quite live, and it's been quite live in council meetings and in terms of planning meetings. So we have the policy. So as you will expect me to say, Ordnance Lane, Willow House and Castle Mills do not meet the criteria of this particular policy in terms of affordable housing mix. I have my own view on how affordable shared ownership is and the definition of what shared ownership is. So we have that 80-20 policy, which is good, and everyone hangs on that and hooks on that. But then there is that just a throwaway line, which undermines the entire policy in many ways, of just saying all on a site-by-site basis. So I'm sure that Councillor Pavlovic would speak eloquently about why there was a specific need on those particular sites to do a different mix to the 80-20 that we say we're doing. But for everybody else, it would be better if we had something in there, something that's more robust, that allows us to be able to say, okay, it is 80-20 in favour of social rent, except in cases whereby this, and there is such a significant benefit of going for 50-50 mix, if we were just, because the argument would be we're delivering 100% affordable rather than a lower level of affordable, therefore the mix is 50-50, not 80-20. But there's nothing in here that allows anybody to be able to dig into whether that is the right decision or the wrong decision, other than that slide that says on a case-by-case basis. And it's the same when things come to committee. I would like to be able to sit at committee and sit there and go, well, actually, no, you're offering 80% shared ownership and 20% social rent. I don't think that's a good idea, because, and the supplementary planning guidance says that your arguments for doing that aren't particularly strong.
Do you want to come back, Andrew? Or?
Yeah, thanks very much. Sorry, yes, I was just looking up the relevant section of the documentation. So I suppose just taking the housing mix first. I think there is a section, a paragraph in section 2 for applications proposing affordable housing in excess of the policy requirement provisions. Applicants should demonstrate that social renter tenure has been maximised within site constraints. In all cases, the equivalent policy minimum social rented proportion must be provided.
And then yes, probably the example that you referred to. So there's a minimum social rent proportion, even where the overall affordable housing tenure has been exceeded. And I think it's sort of recognised that the economics of the site is going to determine what can be done in terms of tenure. I think registered providers, registered providers and Homes England are prioritising social rent as far as possible, but it is, of course, a much more expensive tenure to deliver than some others. And there has to be a balance of tenures that works for the site as a whole, or it wouldn't be possible to bring the affordable housing at all. So that is, I think it is an important point. It's one we've tried to reflect in that paragraph, but happy to take any further considerations on that. And then just picking up on the vacant building credit is really determined by the the NPPF and the associated planning guidance, which, as I understand, it doesn't give us any room for manoeuvre to ask for any further vacant building credit than doesn't give us any guidance to apply it in any different way than is set out in this guidance, really. So this is the guidance is just to try and set expectations as early as possible and to streamline the process so that we get the maximum contribution that we can do within the guidance that the government sets.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions around wording, and I don't know whether it's possible or not to tighten these up at all or not. Under service charges, which is page 78, it says applicants should ensure that service charges do not compromise the affordability of the scheme for residents, which is really important. But compromising the affordability is subjective, isn't it? They might say, well, it's only £5 a week, and actually that £5 a week is the difference between somebody being able to put food on the table or not. I'm just wondering if there's a way of actually defining or strengthening that, whether it's as a percentage of the monthly rental or whether it's saying actually that should be incorporated within. I know a lot of the housing providers do just incorporate those charges within the rental amounts that they do. But as I say, I just wondered if there's a way of tightening the wording up on that. And then similarly, page 89, where it talks about accessibility standards, the second paragraph says the council recommends that as much as possible of all affordable homes should be built to an M42. And I'm just wondering if we can say something stronger. So, can we require that as much as possible? Can we require that more than a certain amount is built to that standard? So the ambition is there, but it's just looking at, in terms of when we see things at committee, if I can point to something that is more strongly worded, that helps us as a committee to ensure that these schemes are coming forward with genuinely as much as possible.
I can certainly come back on the accessibility issue. So it was always the case that supplementary planning documents, our guidance, we can't make new policy. So the issue about requiring accessibility, it's not in any policy. I think we have it somewhere, policy, it's the housing mix policy, isn't it? H3 talks about it, but it doesn't give the thresholds, does it, in the policy, which has been the problem, I think, all along. I think we possibly had something slightly stronger worded here at one point, has been through legal, who did loosen up the language on what we drafted.
Even if we could request rather than recommend, it's just whatever words we can use that are as strong as possible.
Councillor Papovic.
I just clarify on service charges, there isn't anything that we can actually do within planning on service charges. It's really just, it's a request and a kind of what we would expect in reality.
Could I just raise one while you're talking about that? Because if you look at page 78, on page, in terms of shared ownership, which I accept's a different category, in the second paragraph in that section, we've said the rental, sorry, it's rental charges. Sorry, apologies. I'll come back to that separately because I was wondering what it was 2.5% of what. But I'll leave that to come back to that while we're still on the other issue. Apologies. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, I thought there was something in the LHNA around this, because I know when I've looked at shared ownership schemes with Councillor Pavlovic, officers have given me the specific, the specific business cases, and they do include mortgage costs, and the service charge is included in that, and there is a mechanism that is used as part of, that we're using as part of that to calculate that. So off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is, but I do know officers in developing our own schemes are applying, which I'm pretty sure came from the local housing needs assessment criteria of what, because it isn't actually the service charge that becomes affordable. The way they do it is look at it and go, that's the average mortgage with this would cost this, council tax would cost this. If the service charge is X, then that then makes it an unaffordable scheme. So it doesn't assess the affordability of that particular element, but that would be the element that would potentially tip it over and go, well, actually, if your service charge is more than X, then it is no longer a affordable scheme.
Councillor Pavlovic.
And just in respect of the M42 percentages, although you can't go beyond anything that's outlined in the MPPF, I would very much hope that within the local plan review, we make a really strong argument that there is an identifiable need, and that can then be pursued as part of the inspectors and the public the public hearings for the examiners. So the point is well made and well acknowledged that we need to make sure that as many properties as we can get legally away with, if that makes sense, are fully accessible.
Okay, are there any other questions on this document? Can I just raise the one I flagged earlier inappropriately? Page 78, the second paragraph under shared ownership refers to 2.5%, and I wasn't clear at 2.5% of what.
Yes, apologies. I think that is in need of some a bit of redrafting for clarity. So we'll certainly take that away. It is a so yes, of shared ownership, the rental charge is calculated as a percentage of the unsold equity. So you know, if there's 50% sold and 50% unsold, that 2.5% is 2.5% a year of, you know, the 50% that's unsold. So just for context on that, the government sets a sort of standard expectation of 2.75% to calculate affordability, but the guidance is recommending, you know, in view of the York market, you know, a slightly tighter affordability approach that would reduce the costs a little bit on shared ownership properties.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Shall we then move on to the second of the attachments? Lost the page. Page 101. Hot food takeaways. Councillor Eyre.
Two very relatively similar questions. I don't see any genuinely good explanation as to what is and isn't covered. And again, we go back to case by case basis. It clearly gives some specific examples and says, we think this is and we think this isn't. But it's not comprehensive, and it leaves it quite open in terms of that. And then the wider question is, there's no evidence as to why 800 meters is taken instead of 400 meters. There is loose reference to a 20-minute return journey. I can't for the life of me think why there's the suggestion of a 20-minute return journey would lead me, in my mind, to think that we were talking about children on going for lunch and spending 10 minutes being able to get to a takeaway and 10 minutes getting back during their lunch break. Most children aren't allowed out of school, I think, but there are other ways to deal with that. If it is literally the 20-minute return time has come from, we don't want children during school hours going to hot food takeaway. There seems to me better ways of doing that than applying an 800-metre blanket ban, which pretty much, as far as I can see, precludes any takeaway from ever opening again in the city.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the 800 metres, it parallels the one for walking distance to bus stops, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Oh. I mean, it's fairly standard recommendation for a walking distance. It's been used by Active Travel England, Transport for London's Planning Walking Toolkit, the Manual for Streets. The Housing Minister quoted 800 metres as a walking distance in December, because it's something that comes up quite a lot in the MPPF draft. It refers quite frequently to a reasonable walking distance. So that's what we've used.
I'm not arguing that it's not a reasonable walking distance, but this is taking that as a specific definition and applying it to hot food retailers with no apparent link as to why.
But that's what the MPPF says. So the MPPF says development proposals for hot food takeaways should be refused within walking distance of schools. So all we're doing is interpreting what a walking distance could be. I think it has been done quite frequently in hot food takeaway SPDs by other authorities, this kind of interpretation.
So none of that is in the document, by the way. It just says it's based on a 20-minute return journey. So if that's what you're basing it on, that should be in the policy and more strongly articulated. And then my last bit would be to ask you, because I was going to sort of allude to that bit, how many local authorities have adopted 800 and how many local authorities have adopted low figures?
I think mostly 800. I don't have any details, obviously, but there'll be a bit of a mix. But yeah, 800 is not uncommon. We can certainly put some more text around clarity about why we've chosen 800 metres.
Okay. Councillor Pavlovic.
So if that is a recommendation of the committee, the group, we can certainly, Alison can certainly give a clearer explanation of where these figures come from, and that they are based on both guidance within the MPPF and the Active Travel England and the Minister. So yeah, as long as groups happy that should take place, then we can incorporate that. And I'm just wondering for committee members, if they are making a suggestion that they want to see taken forward, that they actually state that it's a suggestion that they'd like to take forward. And that way group can decide, rather than it just being I'd like to make this point. If it's something that you want to take forward, then could we just make it clear that that's that we want incorporating into the report moving forward?
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I mean, you know, my view is this is a good thing. We see in my ward lots of kids going to fast food takeaways at lunchtime. It happens a lot in secondary schools. Obviously, it doesn't happen at all, I don't think, in primary schools. But I can't see that there's anything that isn't good about this, actually. And it does have the caveats for exceptional circumstances, which is what planning committees are there for, to make that determination. I have no problem with spelling out that this is something that comes from the MPPF and that 800 metres is a standard walking distance, if that's felt needed to give, you know, further context and explanation to it. That seems not unreasonable, but I have no issue whatsoever with the policy. I think it's a good thing.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Gary. Councillor Nicholl.
Yeah, I'll take completely opposite view. And the headline is fast food outlets, but there's no reference to fast food outlets within it, apart from it says hot food. And then under the things that are not covered is bakeries, which must have worse food than takeaways. It has ice cream parlours, which have probably worse food than takeaways. And as Councillor Eyre said, the map seems to result that there'll never be a takeaway ever again, which is bizarre that in my village, the only takeaway we have, which I presume if it closed, would never be allowed to open, is on a road where a lorry can go past and knock a child over, but you can't buy a packet of chips, even though it's not open during school time. So it's very, signalling that, well, it's takeaway's fault that people are overweight, not as if delivery will have anything to do with it. And we'll spend time over a policy that will, I'm not sure how it'll achieve anything, because it's not sure what its aim is. Is it abolish hot foods or fast foods? I'm at a loss on this one, I'm afraid. Well, yeah, you're national.
Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, but let's not get away what is national guidance, what is national guidance. I've done a quick search and all the SPDs I've come up with around the country are 400 metres. So it's a reasonable walking distance that this council has defined as 800 metres. It could be defined any other way. It's 400 metres. I totally agree with Councillor Nichols in terms of the worst thing children could possibly do is go to Pret and buy some sort of cheddar and brie sandwich, which is 650 odd calories. That's perfectly fine. That's worse than 2 McDonald's cheeseburgers. That's absolutely fine. If you go to Waitrose and buy a sandwich from Waitrose, 500 calories, absolutely fine. Bag of chips from the fish and chip shop, 230 calories would be banned under this. So it isn't dealing with those particular issues and it isn't national policy. And it would be my recommendation for this group to come back and say that the executive reviews the 800 metre policy, whether that is appropriate, and also what is and isn't out of scope in terms of what organisations are providing highly calorific food. I know I have children. My children far too often come home from school and their bag is full of sweet wrappers and empty Coke bottles, which is significantly worse and significantly part of that. That's not being dealt with in terms of this. So those would be my specific recommendations from this group: review the 400 metre policy and review what is and isn't in scope.
As I say, can I come back to what's in our existing local plan? My recollection is that we've defined walking in the existing local plan for the purposes of bus stops as 800 metres. I would have thought it would be difficult for us to have a different definition here than we have used in other parts in the actual local plan. I think the issue is about the exceptions. Except what typical walking distance is, because that's evidence-based. The issue is what is the exceptions policy that deals with the Councillor Nichols' point. I think that's the key issue here. Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of the points that are made. And the idea of there being a review, I think that would be a good idea. It occurs to me, the points have been made about what you can do. You can go to a public house and a shisha bar and all those sorts of other things, the way this is written. The intention of what's here, I think, is good. But maybe it could be done just as easily by saying that in the future, any such establishment that is proposed within 400 metres or 800 metres or whatever of a school should not be open during school hours. That's a different way of doing it. And then they can still operate a business after the school is closed. So I'd welcome a review just to explore those other options. In which case, are we banning these shops or are we not banning these shops? I'm unclear then. Because we've been having a conversation, these buildings can't be allowed, these businesses can't be allowed.
I think we shouldn't necessarily take our lead from the media, or actually read the papers.
Yeah.
Right, can I ask Alison to explain the hours arrangements in here and to answer Councillor Vassey's question, please?
Yeah, I think it does say, doesn't it, where there's exceptional circumstances where proposals within the 800 metre buffer then it could be granted subject to restricted opening hours. So kind of outside what you might expect school children to be travelling to and from school.
Councillor Anne?
Yeah, so Kirklees was the first one that came up. Kirklees is far more specific because this does say it will be refused. And then you have an exceptional circumstances test, which is in terms of that. Kirklees policy is within 400 metres will not be granted planning permission before 5 p.m, for example. So it's specifically within that reference. The time is in there rather than under a later catch-all.
Councillor Pavlovic?
No offence, but we keep going back over the same point, that this is a guidance, this is not setting new policy. You cannot say in this guidance that meets the criteria of the adopted local plan, which has got the policies in, that otherwise you're setting new policy. And we've talked about that again and again and again in this meeting, that this is guidance, it's not setting anything in stone, but correct me if I'm wrong, officers.
Councillor Crawshaw?
Yeah, just to reiterate the point that Councillor Pavlovic has made, anybody can apply for planning permission for anything, anywhere, essentially. And then what we do is we apply the legislation that says how we then deal with that. And the NPPF, as I understand it, says that we should look to refuse if it's within walking distance of a school. And all that this is doing is defining the walking distance. And as Councillor Merritt has pointed out, we have defined walking distance in our local plan. So this is just putting it into a single document in a single place that enables somebody who wants to open a fast food takeaway somewhere in the city to be able to look at and go, what do I need to meet? This are the things I need to meet. Oh, I'm within 800 metres of a school. I'm going to need to meet an exceptional or demonstrate my exceptional circumstances. Otherwise, I'm going to be refused. And that might be the mitigations that are set out in terms of what would probably be would be conditions around opening times, or there might be some other exceptional circumstances. But all this is doing is fleshing out existing policy. That's what these are going to be for. But in the NPPF, I mean, that's what the officers have just told us.
Okay. I don't think there's going to be an agreement on this, but officers have heard what's said. And, you know, particularly in terms of the evidential links for where the walking distances come from, would obviously, I think, be a helpful addition in the document. Master planning, Councillor Eyre, and
It's just a forlorn question, really, I suppose, Alison, as I 100% support the policy. The policy is very well written. Policy is well thought through, and I would hope it would be applied. The problem is we had the first of the listed garden villages, and the planning inspector completely ignored everything that's in this. So I don't know what the question is really, other than there's nothing I'm guessing we can do to actually make the planning inspector listen to their own policies and their own theories on master planning.
Would you like?
right, do you want to respond to that?
I am aware of the application you were talking about. We're awaiting the outcomes of that appeal decision at the moment to see which way that's gone, but I'm aware of the issues, and we feel that this guidance would be welcome to clarify our position around master planning. I think the wording in the plan and the policies at the moment talks about comprehensive master planning for the strategic sites, and that's what we're seeking to clarify at the moment. I think I should leave it there.
Okay, Councillor O'Rourke.
Yeah. Just following on from that, Chair, when is a garden village not a garden village. We have one in Huntington which says it's a garden village, but it's not on our list here. This is the Monk's Cross Link Road, which got permission nearly 4 years ago and started last week.
So there are 3 garden villages
yeah,
that
yeah.
are referred to, that have the specific wording within the policy structure and the spatial strategy. So for each of those.
Do we
So-
tell Red Road to take that away and stop?
No, we would support the garden village principles being applied. They're a high quality set of principles that should be being brought forward. So we would endorse that, even if we haven't labelled it a garden village. They'd like to adhere to those principles.
School's 800 metres.
Hmm?
The school 800 metres away to walk.
There's a school in the plan. Whether we get it is another matter.
There's no other comments on that one?
Yeah. Thank you, yes. So the things that intrigue me about this one, and thinking of recent planning meetings, there is reference made to cycling and active travel. But in planning committee meetings, when we've looked at larger developments, and members have raised questions about cycling and how you actually connect a development with neighbouring communities, with York, we've always been told, oh, well, you can't do that, that's not on the site. And this document seems to recognise the need for joined up thinking, and the sites in question, one of these is next to my ward, the Elvington Airfield site. Talk about access to services and vibrant social life and healthy living and whatever seems to require, to local residents and certainly to me, that any development like this that got approval would have to include a commitment from the developer to connect that community with other communities. So for example, with Elvington, to have active travel links and cycle paths that took you into York and took you out to Elvington or to Dunnington. Those kind of broader connections that stop a garden village just being an isolated development that people arrive at in their cars and leave in their cars. Is there anything that can be done to this document to add substance to such an approach, to try and make sure that those kinds of developments include a better commitment to active travel?
So the commitment to active travel is set through their individual policies. So each of those strategic sites talk about connections and walking and cycling routes and active connectivity. So I would expect that's not interpreted as on-site only. That particular one shouldn't be seen as an island. That has to be connected in effectively into the city and should be secured as part of that process through the planning process. So it's delivered effectively to be aligned with policy. We can certainly have a look at the wording and whether there's links that we can add to examples or other guidance. But certainly I would expect the policy commitment to be delivered upon, which is that it's not just within the settlement, it's the connectivity of that new development with the surrounds to make it deliver.
Thank you. My experience of planning meetings and how you've explained these documents would suggest that having something in here to add weight and to stress those kind of desires would be helpful. And similarly, I've sat in dozens of meetings where we've called for things that people consider very little things, but swift bricks, hedgehog holes in fences, all these kind of little biodiversity things. If you're going to build a new community in the middle of nowhere, that is fundamentally an opportunity to improve biodiversity gain by having comments about it in this kind of document, I would imagine. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, but to add weight to the idea that we expect such developments to not harm biodiversity and actively to do those little things. It's £100 brick in a house to encourage swifts. We're not talking big sums, but I'd like to think that these kind of documents would get us to raise the bar. Is that something that you would see that this document could do in terms of being a master plan?
We can certainly encourage those sorts of principles to be thought about in terms of the design. And link it, we can link that back to our biodiversity and access to nature policy, which I think is GI3. So we can certainly take that away and look at it, Councillor.
Thank you. Can I make one last comment, because they're all related to the same thing. So again, with water management, we know in York we have a lot of problem with flooding. We, all of us around the table, I think, know that stormwater going into the drainage system is a key cause of sewage farms overflowing into our rivers. When we look at these big developments like garden villages, we have an opportunity at that time to raise the bar and say, we expect water soakaways, we expect flat roofs to be green roofs. We have the aspiration to reduce the amount of stormwater going into the drainage network. I know there are things that touch on that in the local plan itself, but again, I think in this document, would it be a viable thing to have that set out as well? Because we're talking master plan here as an aspiration from the point of view of water management.
Yeah, very happy to look at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to sort of follow on from some of what Councillor Vass is saying there, I think the one sort of note of caution that I would give, because I think we all want the same, have the same, similar aspirations. I think that some of what Alison was saying, if I've understood it correctly, some of these local plan sites will have very specific things within them that require some of those transport connections that you're saying, and that will be a specific policy that is within our local plan that relates to that specific development site, which is slightly different than some of those smaller sites that we get occasionally, where we kind of go, hang on a minute, the cycle path stops at the red line boundary, and if it just went an extra 20 metres, and I think that's perhaps some of what you're getting at. So I think, generally, globally, we all want to have as many tools at our disposal to try to get those things as possible. I think the thing that we just need to be careful of is what I don't want us to do with some of these planning guidance things is write things into a planning guidance that actually is held in a policy somewhere else, that the policy somewhere else then maybe has just slightly different wording or gets updated at a later date and has a slightly different number in it, so that we then open the door to a developer coming along and saying, well, actually, over here it says 10% and over there it says 20%, so I'll have the 10%, please. So it's just making sure that those aspirations around things like Swift bricks and that sort of stuff, which I think probably is contained within some of the stuff around biodiversity rather than around this part of master planning. It's just making sure that those things are at the right point within the structure, so that we as a committee are not getting sort of divided and conquered, as it were, in terms of what I think we have shared aspirations on some of that stuff. So supporting the points that you're making, but I'm sure officers will be keen to make sure that it's held at the right level. So if it isn't necessarily appropriate in that particular planning guidance, it is held, say, within a biodiversity guidance or whatever else it might be.
Thank you for all those contributions. Let's move on then to Annex D, the self and custom build housing planning guidance. And right, Councillor Myers and then Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I just got a bit confused on this one about the array of different types of self-build, what's classed as self-build. In my head, I'm thinking you know, the traditional single dwelling that gets done by a self-build builder, if you like, or a community-led project, as we've seen down at Lowfields in York. But there are, on page 133, there's a number of other developer-led project types, which I didn't recognise as being included in self-build. And then so within the policy, it talks about exemptions for community infrastructure levy. And I just wanted some clarity on the prevalence of the developer-led or developer-built self-builds that are included, and also the prevalence of those types of developers then seeking to get around the community infrastructure levy. It all seemed a bit strange to me, so any extra information would be good.
Just before you answer, I had a sort of partly related question, because when I went through those custom build ones, the last two, the developer built shell home and the developer built pre-approved options, I didn't see how they were consistent with the reference on page 124, the last paragraph, which says the 2015 Act makes clear that homes built wholly or mainly to plans or specifications decided or offered by someone other than the initial occupant are not custom or self-built homes. They didn't seem consistent.
Okay, I can certainly speak to the first question, I think. So the local plan policy is for self-build and custom build houses. It doesn't express a preference for which it is. So we have some definition in the guidance about the different types, because life has moved on, and we know from our self-build register that people would prefer to have self-built plots. But we come back to the issue that we don't have the policy to ensure that it's always self-build. We have this difference between self and custom build, and we're in the position of having to negotiate with developers to try and encourage them to provide self-built plots. So I think this guidance encourages provision of self-build rather than custom build. We can't, again, it's that loosening up of the word, we can't require them to provide it as self-build, but we would prefer it as self-build. So that's where that is. I don't know the details of differentiation with self and custom build and SIL, but that would all be slightly different and dealt with under the SIL system.
Okay. If you could take that one away, if you're not able to respond tonight, and just have a look at it, I think that would be helpful. Right, are there any other? Sorry, Nigel was Councillor Eyre was next.
Sorry. Yeah, it's very briefly. There's a section that says that we don't currently apply local connection test and potential to do so in the future. I just wondered why we don't and why not do it from the outset.
Come back on that, Chair. So we had a legal obligation to put to start a self-build register, which we have, and we have a number of people on that. That has evolved over time, where you're allowed to do more things with your self-build register to maybe refine the people on the final register who would have priority over the self-build homes. And at the moment, we haven't taken a decision to amend our register, so we accept applications for people's interest in self-build on our register, but we haven't yet taken that decision. So that is something we would be looking at as part of actually the new local plan, about how we interpret the policy and how we use the policy and evidence base to support decisions.
Councillor Eyre.
Being productive, Chair. Is that something that we could recommend to the executive to consider whether or not, how, where or when they might want to bring that forward sooner or not? It's your prerogative.
Alison.
Just as a side issue on that, where people have introduced more provisions for their self-build register to assign a local scheme, or for other parameters, they do a charge for that service, so that they in some cases. So that's something that we were considering as well in terms of whether or not how to implement that further. So I just wanted to raise that. If we're taking that to executive, there may be some issues that crop up around that, but we may bring that to this group prior as well to discuss.
Okay. So are we minded as a whole to suggest to the executive that they look at moving towards local priority? Yep. I think everyone, so we can note that. Thank you. Right, if there's nothing else on Annex D, we'll get to the final Annex E on page 135. Houses in multiple occupation. Councillor Myers.
Gibbering away at Councillor Crawshaw, but you've I didn't have much to say about this other than to say I really welcome it, and particularly the final section where you are covering residential amenity. This is having an impact in my community, and I'm sure many others around the city, and the policy that the council's had for many years now is as mentioned having an impact. So introducing more markers to further flesh out that policy is really welcome. Thank you.
Could I just raise two issues? On page 135, we have the background, and the last sentence talks about some of the issues that arise from HMOs, such as loss of family and starter housing. I mean, the other big concern that is flagged later on in the paper, but I think it actually ought to be mentioned in the background as well, is the impact on local amenities that are dependent on all year round residents and you know, a demographic spread, and you know, the concerns about losing local schools, concerns about losing local shops, which I say are mentioned later on, I think should also be here. So that's my first point. Second one is on page 138. The paragraphs, the first two paragraphs about the HMO database. This is an issue that I've had as a ward councillor, where our residents have raised with me the concerns about the difficulty of identifying local HMOs in the neighbourhood, and in effect you have to pay the council hundreds of pounds for a paper copy. So I was a bit surprised when I read this, because I believe that people do have a legal right to obtain that information from the council. So I was a bit concerned about what's here being incompatible with the actual position.
So the HMO database that we use for planning comprises of a number of different data sets. So it comprises of the planning permissions that have been granted, student exempt council tax properties of 3 or more, licensed properties, and other properties that we have been notified that may have been, for example, subject to enforcement, have been accepted by the council as being in that use. Some of those categories are not in public domain. So, for example, the student council tax data is not in public domain as a subset to the council tax. And the view is that currently, when we respond, so we have this issue when we respond, for example, to freedom of information requests, and we stand by the fact that we could identify individuals in the population that may be subject to harassment or abuse on the basis that we release their address as a fully student exempt households. We don't think that's appropriate, and we've taken this view through the information governance team, and that's their supported view as well as to how we handle those sorts of requests for information. What we are looking to do, however, is to try and release anonymised data to support on the website. So, for example, we could release heat mapping to show the spread and concentration across the authority in relation to HMOs, which wouldn't release the individual properties, but would show by maybe the super output area level, which we use for part of the calculations for neighbourhoods. We could look at those to say what percentage HMOs there are in those locations, so you can see more clearly across the authority where the most concentration is.
I'm not sure that fully answers my question. I mean, as I understand it, you can ask for the information about whether property X in the street is an HMO. I've seen that sort of information being provided, which I understand is legal. I can understand the points about council tax exemptions, that type of information, but the basic information about is a property an HMO or not, in which case, you know, then a planning complaint can be made if the perception is it's not meeting the normal planning requirements.
I think the licensing information, it can be applied for, and you can search individually for licenses. There is a difference, however, between the housing regulations in terms of their definition of an HMO and the planning regulations in terms of definition of HMO. We're closer together where we've got additional licensing in the 8 wards across the city where we've introduced additional licensing. Those definitions now align. But in other areas of the authority, the housing, for licensing purposes, the housing definition would apply to the housing regulations.
Councillor Myers.
Yeah, just on this, I'm sure it's the case because I've pointed residents in my ward to the council for them to come and view the document of the database that they're allowed to view as a legal right. It's opened once a month, is it? Is that still the case? Or I'm sure I've been successful in a number of residents going and coming here to West Officers and viewing a database. Is that still happening?
So the HMO license database is available to view, and you can pay for a full copy of the licensing database as far as I'm aware, but you can also come to our website and look up an address to see whether or not that property is an HMO. So we also point people to that public data set. The difference is that for planning purposes, to understand and to support the concentration of this policy, we've used more data sets than that. So that's a starting point for us, but we add these other data sets to it to try and have a more comprehensive picture. We're aware that some HMOs are not licensed in the city and some don't have planning permission. So we're trying to capture as many as we can for the purposes of the concentration of the policy.
Okay. It might perhaps be useful to have a footnote here to explain what, hopefully in a relatively simple way, what we've just been told, that there is a separate database separate from the planning one, which is inspectable. Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, just a really minor one. I think it probably sets it out, but it's just about the car parking spaces, because certainly in Micklegate Ward, the main issue that we have from HMOs is just, you know, 3 or 4 adults in a room in a terraced house. It's 3 or 4 cars where you might otherwise perhaps only have one. And the guidance that's sort of all set out, just looking for the page number, page 140. I think it is clear in terms of an expectation that it's within what would be the red line boundary, you know, in terms of being able to load and offload and move in and out and all that sort of stuff. But just the penultimate paragraph on the page says the provision of sufficient parking for both cycles and cars is therefore important, and a dwelling operating as an HMO should ordinarily provide a minimum of 1 number car parking space per 2 number bedrooms. If you could insert off-site 1 number, sorry, on-site, I should say, car parking space, or off-street, that's what I was mixing up. It's clearly we've been here too long. one number off-street car parking space per dwelling. I think that just makes it really clear for everybody, because I say that's the issue that we experience. And I know there's a lot of the city centre where it's terraced streets where just there physically isn't enough road space for the number of people who want to park their cars there.
Councillor Vassie.
I just want to say, Chair, that I welcome this guidance. As has been said by others, parking is the thing that has come over and over and over again. And it does seem to offer some extra clarity, and I'm happy to endorse what has just been said there about making sure that we're talking about off-street parking. And the comments about being able to manoeuvre in and out, because the problem is if you have 4 parking spaces along the side of a house and you can't get out unless all the other cars come out, the net result is that people park in the street because they can't be bothered. So that clarity about being able to move around within the site is important, and I welcome this. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions. Thank you very much for all the comments and contributions. Officers have hopefully heard all that's been said and will respond in the way that's been indicated during the meeting. I have no urgent business, so thank you all and safe journeys home. Thank you, officers, for all the work that you've done